cold air knives through torn feathers as the great birds climb above a sea of ash. And below them, Mordor opens like a furnace door. Screams scatter in the wind. A Nazgûl stoops out of smoke. Frodo clings to a fistful of plumage, while black arrows hiss upward from unseen towers. One eagle catches fire without a sound, and a single burning feather spins toward the mountain. If this journey into a darker Middle-earth grips you, leave a like, subscribe for more untaken paths through legend, and tell it in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? In Rivendell, before the first feather burned, the idea came like all dangerous ideas in that age, quietly and from exhaustion. The council had spoken long of roads, watchers, and the narrow hope that lay in secrecy. Yet winter deepened in the high passes. The wolves gathered in the wild, and from the north came tidings that spies with black wings and darker purpose crossed valleys no rider could outrun. Gandalf stood beneath bare beech branches above the Bruinen with Elrond, and a guest who did not often stoop to the concerns of walking folk. Gwaihir the Windlord folded his immense wings and regarded the wizard with a bright, pitiless eye. "I have borne tidings," said the Lord of Eagles, "and once I bore you from stone to freedom. Do not ask for more." Gandalf did ask for more. He did not ask lightly. He spoke of time shortening like a drawn cord. He spoke of Saruman's gaze, moving over the mountain passes. He spoke of the ring-bearer's small strength against a world already leaning east. Elrond listened with the grave patience of one who had seen kingdoms rise and turn to dust. And when Gandalf finished, the Elf Lord did not refuse at once. That hesitation was enough for Boromir, who had not been summoned to the council under the trees, but had come seeking the wizard. The man of Gondor heard the words sky, speed, and Mordor, and in his heart a door opened. Could the very swiftness they sought become the cry that summoned ruin? Elrond was the first to say what pride and necessity had nearly concealed. The eagles are not steeds for burden and command. They are a free people, and the ring is no parcel to be hurried over hill and plain like contraband. Gwaihir gave a harsh sound that was not laughter. To the fire that forged it? Into the land where the shadow gathers every sight and sound? No. We are not arrows for the bow of men, but Gandalf pressed him farther than courtesy should have allowed, because courtesy had become a luxury. At last, a bitter compromise took shape. The eagles would bear the fellowship over the worst of the western barriers, perhaps to the eastern eaves of the mountains, perhaps farther if darkness closed every lower path. They would not touch the ring. They would not promise Mordor. They would carry hope only until hope became folly. That should have ended the matter. It did not. Boromir carried the thought like hidden fire back into the house of Elrond, and by evening it had spread among the Nine. The hobbits met the news with 4 different silences. Pippin's broke first, thin and excited. Merry's followed, full of reckless curiosity. Sam looked at the sky and thought only of falling. Frodo heard none of them for several breaths. The burden on the chain at his neck seemed suddenly heavier, as if it already knew it was being discussed by powers that lived above clouds and snow. Aragorn said little. Legolas watched the mountain peaks through the windows and listened to winds no one else could hear. Gimli mistrusted the plan at once, though he admitted that dwarves were not made for heights. Gandalf alone seemed both relieved and haunted. They did not know, not one of them, that by choosing the sky, they were also turning away from a darkness under stone that held within it an impossible mercy. In Moria, a fire older than memory still slept. On a bridge in shadow, a grey wizard had not yet fallen. Some roads hid death, some hid transformation. The Fellowship, desperate to escape the first, never guessed what else they had refused. They left Rivendell before dawn under a moon pale as bone. The eagles waited on a high shelf of rock above the hidden valley, larger in stillness than any tale had prepared them for, with hooked beaks silvered in frost and talons sunk into stone as if stone were soft earth. Their feathers smelled of cold heights, rain, and old pine. Frodo mounted with shaking hands into a harness woven by elvish craft and bound not to the ring, but to the leather crossing his chest. Sam climbed beside him with the rigid courage of one walking into deep water. Gandalf rode with Gwaihir. Aragorn, Boromir, Legolas, Gimli, Merry, and Pippin were distributed among the others as weight and balance allowed. No one looked back until they were already rising. Then all of them did. Rivendell dropped away like a green secret closing over itself. The Bruinen flashed. The last bells of the valley were lost under the beating of giant wings. Sam shut his eyes. Pippin laughed once, then swallowed the sound when the world widened and widened beneath him until hills looked like crumpled cloth. Frodo kept his gaze east, because east was the reason for all of it, and because looking down felt too much like surrender. By noon, they had crossed country that would have taken many weary days on foot. Herds fled in the angle. A woodcutter looked up from a split log, crossed himself in the old manner of forgotten Arna, and told his wife by lamplight that evening that 5 shadows had passed over the sun and none of them had been cloud. In the West Farthing, weeks later, the tale would arrive bent and absurd, as tales do, and old Gaffer Gamgee would mutter that young folk who went seeking adventures probably found them hanging upside down from bird claws. He would not know how near jest had come to truth. Far to the south, on the black spike of Orthanc, Saruman learned what the Free Peoples had done before the first day of the flight had ended. Crebain rose from hollows in Dunland and from pine thickets under the misty mountains, and one by one they brought him a shape they could not understand. Great wings, too many riders, a company bold enough to trust the open sky. He climbed alone to the chamber of the Seeing Stone and set his white hands upon it. There, for a single instant, sharp as a knife, he saw them crossing a veil of cloud. What eye in Middle-earth would fail to mark such passing? His first response was contempt. His second was fear, and not fear that they would succeed. Fear that desperation had made the wise unpredictable, and unpredictability was a door through which all careful tyrannies might stumble. Saruman turned that fear into treachery at once. Across distances, no mortal messenger could cross in weeks, thought met thought in the dark. Watch the skies, he sent toward Barada. Watch the eastern air. The prey has grown visible. In Mordor, Sauron did not yet know exactly what flew toward him, but he understood challenge when it moved across his world. Orders went out like sparks from a forge. Archers climbed watchtowers along the Ephel-Duath. Fires were lit on barren heights to blind night flyers. Creatures long hidden in pits beneath the dark tower were dragged into red light and harnessed. The Nazgûl, who had hunted on horse and fear, which were given a new shape of terror to ride. The Fellowship felt none of this on the second day. They knew only speed and strain. They crossed the wastes of Hollin, where old stones remembered vanished kingdoms. They flew over Caradhras, and the mountain that would have broken them on foot merely glowered beneath them with white brows and knives of wind. Snow lashed upward in sudden gusts. The eagles fought the air with slow, punishing strength. Their bodies were engines of wrath and endurance, yet even they could not make the sky gentle. Frost formed on Sam's lashes. Gimli roared curses into the gale. Legolas stood in his harness as lightly as if walking a bough, and for the first time, even an eagle glanced sideways at him with something like respect. At sunset, they landed in a hidden basin west of the Dimril Dale, and the nine huddled among stones, still holding a day's worth of thin heat. It was there that Boromir first gave the thought voice that would not leave them afterward. "If we can pass the mountains in a day," he said, "why not the whole road in 4? Why creep under every enemy hand when we can strike beyond it?" Aragorn looked at him across the fireless dark. "Because every hour in the air is a banner raised against the horizon. Every hour on the ground is a chance for spies, wolves, and traitors." Gandalf answered before the dispute could sharpen. "Both are true. That is the misery of it." Frodo sat apart, touching the chain beneath his shirt. One of the eagles had come near earlier, not the one that bore him, and had drawn back with a hiss low and involuntary. Not at Frodo, at what he carried. It had felt the ring without seeing it. If the ring could burden a hobbit's neck, what might it do to a lord of the upper air? The answer began to show itself the next morning. The eagle that carried Frodo and Sam faltered once in clear weather, not a loss of strength. Something stranger. A moment's crookedness in the flight, as if an unseen hand had tugged at its will and pointed it not east but upward, higher and higher into bright emptiness where no arrow could reach and no friend could follow. Gandalf saw it, called sharply in the language of the eagles, and the great bird shuddered as one waking from a dream. Frodo felt the ring suddenly warm against his skin. That evening, when they reached the eaves of Lothlorien and descended among malon trees bright as captive sun, Galadriel did not greet them with wonder. She greeted them with sorrow. The lady moved among the eagles and laid a hand upon one vast folded wing. "You have brought haste," she said, "and haste has brought notice. The river below is watched, the mountains behind are watched. Even now the eye turns not only to the roads, but to the heavens above them." Celeborn's face was stern as weathered stone. "You should remain. Let the air forget you." For one long night, the possibility of ending the attempt lay before them like a last bridge. They could descend. They could choose cloaks, silence, boats, and hidden banks. They could accept that no broad and noble thing would save them, only patience and hunger and mud. Gandalf urged caution. Aragorn agreed. Legolas, who had spoken least, said simply that the sky had grown crowded with fear. Yet Boromir, worn raw by weeks of dread for Gondor, argued the opposite with all the power of a man who can already hear his city calling him to fail it. "If Sauron now watches the ground and the air alike," he said, "then there is no secret left, only speed. Every day we delay, Minas Tirith bleeds. Every day we creep, his armies grow." Frodo listened to them all. He had stood by Galadriel's mirror that afternoon and seen not one clear fate, but many fragments. A white wall under black wings, a red eye searching cloud, Sam's hand slipping from wet stone, and an eagle falling through smoke like a brand dropped into a pit. Had they already mistaken motion for hope? He did not know. No one did. In the end, he did what burdened people often do when all choices look like ruin. He chose the ruin that promised to end sooner. At dawn, they left Lothlorien and committed themselves, truly this time, to the flight toward Mordor. The world widened and darkened as they followed Anduin south. The river shone beneath them like hammered steel by day and black glass by night. On the western banks, horse herds scattered in the plains of Rohan. A shepherd boy in the Eastfold saw the shadows pass over his flock and thought for one terrified moment that winter itself had grown wings. His father told him to keep the sheep moving and not to stare east after sunset. In Edoras, beneath a roof of gold dimmed by grief and poison counsel, word came of great birds seen in the south and stranger cries heard after dark. Grima smiled when he heard it, because all fear was food to him. Gollum saw them too. He crouched among reeds near the marshy margins of the river, half-starved and all appetite, and watched the great shapes cross the moon. For an instant, his old life, long buried under slime and malice, remembered the wonder of things high and clean. Then the ring called from above, thin as a thread and sharp as a hook, and wonder curdled to hunger. He began to follow at once, never taking his pale eyes from the direction in which the shadows had gone. Saruman's orcs moved as well. He did not believe the eagles could reach Mordor unbloodied. Not once the Nazgûl took the air. But he believed survivors would fall somewhere between the river and the Black Land. So he seeded the ground with hunters. Uruks went east from Isengard in bands swift and lean, under orders to seize any hobbit alive and any great jewel or weapon not nailed to bone. On their march, farmsteads in the Westfold woke to barking dogs, trampled crops, and the smell of wet leather in moonlit lanes. The ordinary world had no voice in councils, but it always paid. The attack came at Rauros. It came in the hour before dawn, when even fear grows tired, and the mind mistakes grey light for safety. The eagles were crossing the thunder of the falls, their wings made silver for an instant by rising spray, when a cry like metal torn in half split the air above them. Out of low cloud descended the first of the winged Nazgûl, cloaked black forms astride creatures that seemed stitched from bat, vulture, and nightmare. Their stench arrived before their talons did. The sky became a place of whipping pinions, venomous screams, and sudden, impossible angles. Gandalf rose in Gwaihir's harness and flung up his staff. White flame cracked through the mist. One fell beast reeled, trailing smoke, and vanished into the cataract below. But four more plunged in behind it, and from hidden shelves along the eastern cliffs, arrows rushed upward in black swarms. Boromir did not cry out when the eagle beneath him took the first shaft. The bird convulsed. Merry and Pippin were hurled against the leather bindings, white-faced, speechless. A second arrow buried itself in the creature's breast. Boromir hacked at the straps with his sword, not to save himself, but to free the hobbits before the crash. "Hold to me!" he shouted, and his voice was almost lost in wind and water. Aragorn tried to turn back. Legolas loosed arrows into the melee with impossible calm, each shot chosen between wing beats. Gimli clung with both hands and cursed every cursed thing above and below the sun. Frodo saw Boromir's shield flare once in the mist as a talon struck it, and then the eagle folded, falling westward through spray toward the green banks above the falls. One of the potential endings of the world passed them in that descent. The crash threw Earth into the air. Boromir lived. The eagle did not. Merry and Pippin crawled from splintered harness and broken feathers with blood on their faces, and no idea which way the others had gone. The woods nearby answered for them with horn calls not of Gondor, and harsh laughter in the speech of Isengard. Saruman's hunters had been waiting exactly where he hoped they would be needed. Boromir got to his feet among the wreckage, breath tearing in his chest. He had lost his shield. His sword was nicked. The horn at his side was cracked from the fall. He heard the Uruks before he saw them. Merry reached for a stone, Pippin for a broken spear. Boromir looked at the two small hobbits and understood, with the clean despair granted only to brave men, that Gondor had become this patch of wet ground and these children not his own. He blew the horn anyway. Its call went out over Rauros, broken but proud. Aragorn heard it from the eastern bank. So did Legolas. So did Gimli. Frodo heard it like a stab through the morning. Then came the answering howls of Uruks, and the horn stopped forever. Boromir slew many before he fell. He killed the first with a snapped harness buckle driven into its throat, the second with his sword through the mouth, the third and fourth shoulder to shoulder as they rushed him. An arrow took him in the side, another in the thigh, another below the collarbone. He stood over Merry and Pippin until the last strength of his body was gone, and, even then, he did not fall backward toward them. He fell forward as if still advancing. The Uruks bound the hobbits and dragged them west. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli reached the ruin too late. The body of the eagle steamed in the cold dawn, smelling of blood and singed quill. Boromir lay beside it, breathing in shallow red bursts. His eyes found Aragorn's, and there was shame in them, but not for dying. "I urged the sky," he said. "I thought speed would save us, save my city. I have paid for the thought." "You have conquered," Aragorn told him. Boromir's gaze moved toward the east, toward a road he would not walk again. Then do not let this haste be for nothing. He died with the river thundering beside him, and the world already moving on without permission. Gwaihir carried Frodo, Sam, and Gandalf through the chaos, only by becoming the chaos. The Wind Lord climbed where the Nazgûl mounts could not easily follow, then dropped like a stone through cloud and ash, forcing pursuit into blind air. A Morgul dart struck deep beneath his left wing. Sam saw the shaft protruding black and thin between feathers white with frost. Gwaihir did not cry out. He only flew harder, every beat now uneven, every breath a labor. At last, east of the river among the knife ridges of Emyn Muil, he could go no farther. He crashed onto bare rock and nearly rolled into a ravine before Gandalf braced his staff against stone and stopped the slide. The eagle's wound leaked a foul smoke that no herb of Middle-earth could wholly cleanse. Below them lay a labyrinth of broken hills. Ahead, far off, the dead haze of Mordor. Behind, in widening circles, the search already began. How many times can fate offer the same warning before it becomes judgment? Gandalf saw in an hour what the council had feared and desperation had ignored. The air itself had become the enemy's net. Every great wing would now be hunted. Every unusual shadow on the ground would draw attention. If he remained with Frodo, his own name, power, and the wound of Gwaihir would burn like a beacon. So the choice he made there was cruel because it was necessary. "You must go down," he told Frodo, "into the places no captain would choose and no eye gladly seeks. Sam stared at him. "Without you? With me, you are found. Without me, you may yet be missed." Gollum was already near. Gandalf had felt the miserable creature following their path since the river. He did not trust him, but he trusted the strange providence that had allowed such a being to survive at all. "There is one guide in this land who loves holes more than horizons," he said. "Use him, but do not give him your sleep." Frodo looked at the wounded eagle, at the old wizard suddenly greyer than he had ever seemed, and understood that the attempt to fly into Mordor had ended not with triumph or total ruin, but with something worse to bear: subtraction. No company, no broad plan, no glorious strike, only the original burden, stripped of illusion. Gandalf mounted Gwaihir once more and turned south, not east. He would draw what pursuit he could away from the hobbits and carry warning to Gondor and Rohan if the eagles survived the effort. Frodo and Sam watched him lift, falter, and vanish into glare above the stone maze. Only when the sound of wings was gone did Gollum whisper from a crack in the rocks, "Nice, master, poor master, no more birdses." Aragorn did not pursue Frodo. He could not even be certain the ring-bearer still lived. Before him lay Boromir dead, Merry and Pippin stolen, and a choice between the mission of the world and the cries of two captured friends. It was a choice that would have broken lesser men, yet in him, kingship began as it often does, not in certainty, but in refusal to abandon what is near, because what is far is grander. He set Boromir in one of the boats, laid beside him his cloven horn and a great feather scorched at the tip, and sent him down Anduin toward the city he had loved beyond prudence. Now then he turned west with Legolas and Gimli after the Uruks. Their chase drove the story of the world into Rohan sooner and under a darker sky. Westfold villages that in another age might only have heard rumor of war now saw its smoke before harvest. Women carried children through sleet, while far off the Horn of Helm. Hammerhand answered drums in the hills. Riders found carcasses of strange winged beasts in gullies and wanted no songs made of them. The old safety of looking up for weather and hawks was gone. Men looked up now, expecting horror. Merry and Pippin still came to Fangorn by pain and chance, still met Treebeard beneath the eaves where the forest walks in its sleep. Yet even there the change was felt. Above the trees, black shadows passed more often. The Ents muttered that young Saruman had stirred not only axes and fire, but fear in the very weather. When they marched on Isengard, their anger was joined by something new, a slow, arboreal loathing of creatures that made the sky itself seem unnatural. Gandalf reached Minas Tirith before death could claim Gwaihir, though only barely. The eagle crossed the White City at dawn, while laundry snapped on lines below and bakers were lighting ovens in the sixth circle. Heads turned upward. Some cried in awe. Some fled indoors. Denethor came to a high window as the great bird descended in a ragged spiral and struck the paving stones of the citadel with enough force to crack one of them. Gwaihir did not rise again. Gandalf knelt beside the Windlord as soldiers and servants gathered in horrified silence. The eagle's eye, fierce to the last, fixed on the eastern haze beyond the city. There was no speech, yet the old debt between bird and wizard passed its final measure there. Then the great head lowered, and the Lord of Eagles died under the white walls of men. That death changed Gondor in ways no banner could show. The guards who witnessed it carried the sight into every level of the city. An eagle, a creature of high airs and ancient freedom, had come bleeding from the east and died on their stone. Whatever war was approaching, it reached even the clouds. Denethor saw the same event and drew from it the opposite lesson. In the secret dark of the Palantir, he had already glimpsed enough to poison hope. Now he looked upon the dead eagle and concluded that even the wise had spent their last wild chance and failed. His despair, which in another course of history might have smouldered longer, found fresh fuel. Gandalf, still Gandalf the Grey, felt the loss more sharply than any in the city could know. He had not fallen in Moria. He had not passed through fire and death into a higher authority. There was no White Rider here, no transfigured herald to overawe kings or challenge darkness with new power. There was only an old wizard, wiser and wearier, with less might than the hour demanded. The shortcut had spared him one abyss, and stolen from the west the strange gift hidden in it. When he rode north to Rohan, he did not break Theoden's bondage in an instant of unveiled majesty. He fought for the king's spirit with words, memory, and the help of loyal hearts already stirred against Grimace venom. Theoden did awaken, but slower. And during those slower days, more farmsteads burned, more riders died on lonely roads, and more fear took root in ordinary homes. The victory at Helm's Deep still came, but nearer to disaster, with more widows waiting under torchlight and more children searching rubble for faces that would not answer. Two lesser eagles, kin of Gwaihir, swept once over the walls at dawn and tore through ladders and standard-bearers, and the sight became song afterward. Yet the songs never forgot how late it was. In Ithilien, far from the crash of kingdoms, Frodo and Sam followed Gollum through a world made stranger by the failed flight. Sauron's fortifications had risen to meet a threat from above. Towers now kept braziers for night-blinding smoke. Watchers studied ridgelines and open approaches where great wings might dare a rush. But in the blind angles beneath cliffs, among ditches, sinkholes, and old goat paths, attention thinned. Gollum knew those paths. He had learned them while hiding from soldiers who looked outward and upward, but seldom downward into filth. Was Sauron guarding his doors or opening another? Frodo sensed the answer before Sam did. Their very folly had taught the enemy to expect boldness. So the smallest, foulest route became not safe, but survivable. In the dead marshes, the lights still floated over dark water, and dead faces stared beneath the surface. Yet now scraps of black feather sometimes drifted among the reeds, mute reminders that the sky too had become a graveyard. Sam hated Gollum with a steady heat. Frodo pitied him with the weary tenderness of one burden recognizing another broken burden. At Henneth Annan, Faramir found them as he found many secrets, by patience. The captain of Gondor had already seen his brother's boat come down river, guided by a current that seemed almost ceremonial in its grief. He had seen the broken horn, the rent mail, and the scorched eagle feather pinned under Boromir's hand as if held there by intention. So when he looked upon Frodo and Sam and heard enough of their errand to know its danger, he understood more swiftly than he otherwise might have. Something desperate had happened in the sky. Boromir had died trying to mend it. Faramir would not worsen it. He loved our city too fiercely, Faramir said quietly when Frodo spoke Boromir's name. Sometimes love mistakes itself for wisdom. Sometimes it becomes wisdom only after the wound. He let them go. By the time the storm broke upon Minas Tirith, the altered path of the world had produced every kind of cost. Saruman had fallen, but later and after more ruin. Rohan came, but bloodier. Gondor stood, but with a steward already half lost to despair. The Nazgûl, blooded in the skies months before, had become yet more terrible in men's imagination. Their cries over the Pelennor reached into cellar and stable, into kitchens where cooks dropped ladles, and into nurseries where infants woke shrieking for reasons they could never name. The siege smelled of pitch, old blood, wet stone, and the sweet rot of crushed grass under thousands of feet. At the great gate, when the Witch King came, Gandalf was there waiting. Yet he was not the being who in another history had returned robed in white flame. He stood as he was, mortal in weariness, iron in purpose, but not transformed. Their contest became not a stalemate of equals, but a desperate holding action bought by courage and the narrow space between doom and delay. The gate broke. The Black Captain entered. Men fled before him. Gandalf did not. He was driven back step by step, staff ringing against mace, until the horns of Rohan at last split the morning and changed the rhythm of disaster. So even here the skipped road through Moria cast its shadow. The Witch King still met his end on the field. Beneath the shield of a woman and the blade of a hobbit, no prophecy had measured correctly. Merry, who had once dangled helpless from a falling eagle's harness, now drove steel into sinew behind a black knee. Eowyn stood over him with a face white as winter and answered ancient malice with simple defiance. The great terror collapsed, and for one heartbeat, the whole plain seemed to exhale. That might have felt like an ending. It was not. For while kings fought and cities burned, Frodo and Sam climbed. Through Cirith Ungol, through hunger, through the terrible wound left by Shelob, through the plain of Gorgoroth under a sky where the remaining Nazgûl hunted anything that moved. The memory of the eagles never left Frodo on that road. Sometimes, when he staggered, he felt not only the weight of the ring, but also the remembered exposure of the open sky, the horror of being seen too clearly by a power vast enough to turn weather into pursuit. He understood now with bone-deep certainty why no winged rescue could ever have brought him safely to the fire. Grandeur was meat for the eye. Smallness was the only cloak left. After the Pelennor, when the captains of the West debated what little remained to them, Aragorn proposed the march upon the Black Gate, as in the old story, but with a sharper edge forged by what had already happened. He did not ask the eagles to bear him. He did not ask them to bear any man. He asked something harder and more honorable, that the surviving lords of the air make war in their own fashion and draw the enemy's thought upward one final time. Landroval came. So did a handful of others, scarred, diminished, and wrathful. The death of Gwaihir lay between them and every mortal face. They would not be used again as conveyance. They would, however, choose their own vengeance. "We are not steeds," said Landroval, "but we may yet be a storm." At the Morannon, under a sky the colour of bruised iron, the last great turn began. Aragorn's small host advanced across a waste of cinders, while the dark towers opened their teeth. Drums rolled from within the gate, standards whipped in furnace wind, and above, on a sign known only to the free captains, the eagles descended. They fell not toward the mountain, where all eyes were already half turned by fear, but upon the towers and signal posts ringing the Black Gate. Talons tore archers from parapets, beaks smashed braziers, and sent blinding smoke back into orcish faces. The Nazgûl leapt to meet them, black shapes shearing upward on their shrieking mounts. Battle returned to the air where the story had first gone wrong. Far away, and yet under the same sky, Frodo and Sam reached the Samath Nar. Inside the cracks of doom, no eagle could help them. No king could help them. No wizard, white or grey, could help them. There, at last, the failed shortcut revealed its final lesson. The world might be distracted by battles above and beyond, but the ring could be ended only in the smallest circle possible. One broken hobbit, one faithful friend, one ruined creature crawling out of memory with murder in his mouth. Outside the Black Gate, Landreval seized a Nazgûl mount by the throat and hurled it screaming onto spear points. Another eagle lost a wing to barbed bolts and vanished spinning into the dust. Aragorn fought below amid men who could not spare a glance upward, though the sky rained black feathers and burning leather. Inside the mountain, Frodo claimed the ring. Sam cried out. Gollum attacked. Teeth flashed. A hand was severed. And then the old pity on which the whole world had quietly depended made its final, a terrible demand. Gollum fell with his treasure into the fire. The change was immediate enough to feel physical. Across Gorgoroth, the earth shuddered. At the Morannon, every creature of the dark felt something central tear loose. The Nazgûl in the sky gave one last cry, no longer terrible, but empty, and were blown away like scraps of shadow before a furnace blast. The eagles who still lived wheeled clear as the Tower of Barad-dûr began to break, stone falling in distances too great for sound to keep pace with sight. Black clouds rose, then ripped apart from within by a wind no tyrant commanded anymore. Relief came first, violent and unbelieving. Men sank to their knees. Horses trembled. In Minas Tirith, bells rang until hands bled from pulling them. In the fields of the Pelennor, women who had hidden in cellars emerged to find the air changed. Cleaner by a breath, though smoke still lay over everything. In the Shire, far away, the spring that followed seemed one shade greener than it had any right to be. Then disquiet returned, softer but harder to dismiss. The world had been saved, yet not in the manner desperate hearts had once imagined beneath Rivendell's peace. The attempt to master distance with wings had not failed because the eagles lacked strength. It had failed because evil notices spectacle. The sky, which seemed freedom to those trapped below, had been the one road the enemy could not afford to ignore. The grand gesture drew every eye. The small, limping, pitiable one passed underneath. Aragorn was crowned in the White City, and when he looked up during the feast of his coronation and saw eagles circling high and aloof above Mindolluin, he bowed his head rather than raise a hand. They had paid too much for mortal haste. In Rohan, Theoden was laid beneath green mounds, and old riders told younger ones never to mistake speed for foresight. Faramir kept the scorched feather found with Boromir's body in a coffer of cedar, not as a token of folly alone, but as remembrance that courage and error often wear the same face in the hour before judgment. Merry and Pippin laughed again, because hobbits are stubbornly made for laughter, yet loud cries in the wind could still stop them cold for a heartbeat. Sam returned to the Shire with earth under his nails where it belonged, but sometimes on clear mornings he would step outside Bag End, look at the broad, harmless sky, and feel an old vertigo rise from nowhere. Frodo could not look at great birds thereafter without tenderness and pain. He remembered the beat of desperate wings over Rauros, over ash, over the edge of impossible hope. He knew better than most how close salvation and catastrophe can resemble one another when seen from far away. The eagles withdrew even further from the dealings of the lower lands. Their eyries in the northern heights grew quiet. Fewer young were seen on the crags for many years. Shepherds in the vales of Anduin sometimes glimpsed one vast silhouette against evening cloud and took off their caps, not in worship, but in apology. And Middle-earth remembered. It remembered that the road underfoot, however miserable, may be safer than the splendid path visible to all enemies. It remembered that some shortcuts are only traps lit by hope. It remembered too that even failure can become part of victory. Only for the doomed flight had forced Sauron to widen his gaze, to divide his fear, to waste vigilance on the sky, while two small figures crawled through ash below his notice. In that sense, the eagles did reach Mordor, not as saviors, as sacrifice. What survived victory when even the skies remembered the fire? Years later, on the eastern marches where the grass slowly returned over old battlefields, children found feathers longer than a man's arm burned black at the quill and bronze at the tip. Their mothers took them away without speaking. Their fathers buried them facing east. And when the wind came hot from the ruins of the Black Land, it sometimes lifted a little ash into the evening light, and for a breathless instant it looked like wings falling again.